Hello, and welcome to this, our 65th live stream. It's the storage city of popcorn. What we're talking about, of course, is it's in reference to the storage city of Pithom, which was our Monday's release. Now, what exactly is a storage city? A storage city is a collection of mud brick silos that were typically built surrounding a temple. And one of the reasons this was done was because back in the days of ancient Egypt, they didn't have money. It was entirely a barter economy. One of the things about money is it is compressed wealth. Okay? So if you are storing up money instead of food, you can store up you need a whole lot less space for money. Well, what do you do if you have to have food offerings for several hundred years after your death? And you don't have money. Well, you have to store the food instead. And this is what happened, is that kings in ancient Egypt, to create an endowment for their temples, would build these massive mud brick storage silos all around their temples. And these were huge. I mean, these took up acres and acres and acres. And then the king over his lifetime would collect food, and then that food would be made into food offerings that would be then given to the gods. So, instead of grain in our storage silos, we're putting popcorn. And of course, the Egyptians didn't have popcorn, but no culture's perfect. Okay, so let's talk about. We're gonna get into your questions, and the rules are the same as always. Super chats have priority. But we also take questions that are non-super chats also. So we take a regular. If you put a question in the live stream, we will try to do, and it interests us, we'll take it and we'll answer it. But we also ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question so I see it, and so that I know it's being directed to me and not somebody else in the live stream. Okay? And only ask your question once. If we see any duplicates, we won't answer it, because we've had people in the past question spam the live chat, and we don't tolerate that anymore. Also, if it has to do with a Bible verse or a foreign word, we would ask that you would please give us the book, chapter, and verse so I know where to find it. Or in the case of a foreign word, what language it's from and what you think it means, just so I have a little bit of context to go off of. So with that said, we're going to get into the questions. We are right now enduring a heat wave. It is absolutely the hottest temperatures, the hottest August that Vancouver has seen in a very, very long time. So everyone here is just dying of the heat. Air conditioners have not been typically put into buildings in Vancouver, so when we get conditions like this, it's just absolutely miserable. So if you see sweat running down my face like Niagara Falls, that's what's happening, is that we have no air conditioning and we're just sort of trying to stay cool as best as possible. Okay, so that said, let's get into the questions. Our first question is a non-super chat, and we'll take 5 non-super chats to begin with. TG Bocci asks, if the Bible doesn't discuss the physical origins of the universe, what does it say about eschatology? Does it discuss the physical ending of the universe, world universe? Only in a very sort of vague way. And in some ways, it's a lot vaguer than origins. To be honest, if that's even possible. At least with the physical origins, we are at least given some idea that the universe has a beginning. We're actually, in the case of the physical ending of the universe, there is no concrete end. It says to be everlasting. Okay? So, given that, The Bible doesn't actually tell us about what the physical nature of the universe is going to be at the end of days. After all eschatology is wrapped up. So pretty much we know that those who believe will be with God and enjoy Him forever. But at the same time, too, what that experience is going to be like, what's the physical universe going to be like. We know that the new heavens and the new earth are going to be, sort of reborn as the old earth and the old heavens are rolled up like a garment and thrown away. So we don't actually have a lot of concrete info here to go on. And I kind of wished we had. But unfortunately, the Bible doesn't tell us much about what's the physical ending of the universe. Only that it is going to happen. It's going to happen in a cascade of fire, according to, I think it's 2 Peter. But that's about all we know. So we actually have less info for the end than we did for the beginning. But anyway, thank you very much for the question. Unfortunately, there's not much more we can say. Okay, our second question comes from Chow Yi. And he asks, what advice would you give to amateur archaeologists who want to effectively engage the material but don't have the time or resources to become professional archaeologists? Okay. Here's what you need. Time. The one thing you said you don't have. Because it's going to be true of amateur archaeologists or professional archaeologists, is that if you want to engage the material effectively, you have to read. You have to read a lot. How can you tell an archaeologist who's going downhill in his career? He stopped reading. Okay? You need to read. You need to read archaeological reports, peer-reviewed articles, books, collected essays. A lot of the scholarly literature, you have to read that, and you have to voraciously read. An amateur archaeologist who voraciously reads is better than a professional archaeologist that never reads. Okay? So it's not always about do you have the professional credential or not. It really boils down to how much reading do you do? He who reads the most will be the most effective in engaging the material. And it's just that simple. And in order to read, you have to have time. So somehow, even if you don't have other resources, you have to find the time. It's the one thing you got to do. You got to read. You got to read a lot. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the question. And, it's a good question, but the answer is reading. Okay, our next non-super chat comes from Magnificent Universe, and he asked this question last week. I asked him to repost it, and he did again. And he says, I've stumbled upon some Christian pages that claim that the wall in Karnak from the time of Shoshank, the Bubastites portal, has the fields of Abraham and the highlands of David toponyms inscribed on it. Is it true? And the answer is, to a large extent, yes. It is true. Now, we do find the heights of Dawit in, I think it's rings 105 and 106 of the Bastite portal. This reading is confirmed by Kenneth Kitchen. He says this is, overall, he basically thinks that this is a secure reading. Basically, given that Dalet Vav Te is a reading of the name David that we find in many ancient documents. So he's very confident of that reading, and I have no reason to doubt it. Now, the fields of Abraham, we're less sure. We're less sure of that one. It's a possible reading, and it's not really fields, it's really more enclosure. So it's the enclosure of Abraham, and it's near Hebron, at least according to the captive circles. So In that particular case, it could also read enclosure of the stallions. So that's the problem with this particular reading, is it could go both ways. It could either be enclosure of Abraham, or it could be enclosure of stallions. So we're not really sure with rings 71 and 72. But at the same time, it's possible. It's possible. It's not crazy, okay? This is not a reading that's crazy. We do get people who read things sometimes and they're out in left field. This is not out in left field. These are definitely, and you do find on some junk, say, Christian apologetics pages where there'll be some really odd, strange, and out of left field readings. These are not those. These are actually backed up by some good scholarship. Okay? And I did verify them myself. So I did go into the hieroglyphic text and I looked them up myself. Okay? So, is it true? I would say mostly. It's mostly true. So, but I was then, again, hedge my bets on the field of Abraham. The case for the heights of David, that's pretty strong. There's a pretty strong case there. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question. That was a very interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it again, so we did actually do the work and checked it out. Okay, our fourth question is also from Magnificent Universe. I normally don't take two non-super chats back to back from the same person, but this one is so interesting. This one is so interesting that I couldn't help it. And he says, Genesis 44:5 says that Joseph used a silver cup for divination. Are there any known Egyptian or other Middle Eastern practices from the time that mention cups of divination, and how did it look like? Ooh. Fascinating question. Because there is, from ancient Egypt, we have an extant example of a divination cup. Yep, it's absolutely true. And here is what it looks like. This was recovered from the tomb of King Tutankhamun. And this is his divination cup. It's not made out of silver, it's made out of alabaster. Okay? But it is a divination cup. And, you know, you can even see on the sides there, on the handles, out of the lotus, you've got the god Thoth there, you know, and he's the god of knowledge, of magic, of writing. And there's two gods whispering into each one of his ears. It's a divination cup. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. This cup, of course, dates to roughly the 1330s BC. It is just it's beautiful. I mean, if you ever get to see this thing in person, it is absolutely gorgeous. This is, by the way, this is my own photograph. So I saw this when it was in Paris. It's an astounding piece of work. Absolutely gorgeous. Interestingly enough, this was actually found in the passageway as Howard Carter was going down into the tomb. So tomb robbers had actually tried to loot this and sort of dropped it on their way out. So we almost didn't get this piece, but it's got an interesting history. It's fascinating, and it is a divination cup. So we don't have one extant in silver. I wish we did. Silver was very rare. Very, very precious metal in ancient Egypt. So if people saw silver, they tended to recycle it, melt it down. But here we go. Here's the divination cup. Anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting question, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the photograph of a real divination cup. Okay. Our next question is from the MRB. And he asks, what are your thoughts on the obscure, I guess plausible hypothesis that the tabernacle was built like a yurta, a circular tent, or in a dome shape and very large? Okay. When I heard this hypothesis, I was at the general meeting of the American Society of Oriental Research. when it was being held in Denver, Colorado. And I don't remember the year. It was something like, I think it was 2016 or 2017. It's 2017. Sorry, it wasn't in Denver. It was in Boston. Boston. And I go downstairs, and there was this one, how do I say this, a table where a guy had this theory on display, and he had some laminated sheets on this, and this. He goes, "Oh, this is the real design of the tabernacle." And I started laughing. It was so ridiculous. I mean, the guy thought it was huge. I mean, like this massive dome that's 100 feet across and 100 feet tall. In what way is this supposed to be portable? It was so strange. It was one of the strangest theories I ever saw. It was bizarre. It doesn't fit the text at all. I mean, it was just the fantasy of an engineer. I mean, that's what the guy did prior to his retirement. He was a structural engineer, and he came up with this idea of a tent that was the same distance in all directions. And it was based upon an idealization, and it's very, very strange. So my thought was, I was laughing my head off. I gave it all the consideration and respect it was due. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It is a strange hypothesis. It's a really strange hypothesis. It has no basis in fact. Okay, now we're going to go on to the super chats. Our first super chat is from John Morton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he writes, are the genealogies listed in the New Testament, Matthew 1 and Luke 3, clans as well, or any reason to think otherwise? Thanks. Okay. Partially. They're partially clans. When you get to before the Exodus, you're then starting to read. So you can kind of divide the line at sort of the Exodus. For the most part, it's when the sort of Toledotes start changing from, say, clans to individuals. So we start seeing individual names being recorded in these genealogical lists sort of after the Exodus and into the time of, say, Joshua and the Judges. Before that, it's almost definitely clans, and it's almost exclusively clans. Okay? And I don't think there's any reason to think that those names, or at least the ones early in the genealogies of Matthew 1 and Luke 3, are anything other than clans, because they are, in essence, recording much of what's in Genesis. And Genesis is recording clans. It's definitely recording clans. So if you find it in Genesis, it's probably a clan, at least reading, for the most part. Not always, but for the most part. So anyway, that's the answer to the question. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I'm glad you were here tonight. It's a good question, and it is one of the things we can actually definitively say about those genealogies. So thank you very much. Okay, our next super chat comes from 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. And he asks, how is the discrepancy explained in dating the destruction of Jericho to 1550 or 1400 BC based upon by pottery deal with Garstang finding a scarab of, must be in respect to or something dealing with Garstang finding a scarab of Amenhotep III, circa 1386 to 1349 BC in a tomb northwest of the city. Okay. Now, the 1550 date, that's Kathleen Kenyon's date. The 1400 date is Bryant Wood's date. Nobody takes the 1400 date seriously. Okay. Now, we do know that Garstein did find a scarab of Amenhotep III there. We also know that the Cyclopean wall is unmistakably Middle Bronze. There's no question it's Middle Bronze. No question at all. Okay? The pottery that we find in the destruction layer and below, also Middle Bronze. No question about that either. What basically Bryant Wood did was he basically looked through, say, the pottery records, because all the pottery is recorded. You know, and there's a fragment of Mycenaean ware there. Okay? And Bryant Wood is going to say, aha! Mycenaean ware. That's 1400. Therefore, the destruction of the Middle Bronze fortification is 1400 BC. Okay. Now, Bryant Wood has to also make double down on an absence of evidence argument. He has to say there was no further building on the Middle Bronze fortification until the Iron Age village. And he has to double down on that hard. And in his article, Jet's article, he is basically going to say that, you know, Ken Kitchen, Jim Hoffmeyer, all these late daters who think that there was some sort of structure on there after the Middle Bronze fortification, City 4, are just basically, the wishful thinking. It's wishful thinking. There's nothing there. So he's taken an absence of evidence argument. It's basically saying, well, we found nothing there. Therefore, all this evidence must then point to a 15th century destruction of City 4. And therefore, that is Joshua's destruction. Okay? That's it in a nutshell. Okay. Now, in the 2020 article by Lorenzo Nigro, what he does is he finds the remnants of late bronze fortifications. Okay? And he finds them to be extant in late bronze 1 and at least through late bronze 2A. He doesn't find a destruction there, but he does find continuous occupation through 1400, through 1300. And it's at the end of, say, the 13th century, roughly about 1200, 1220-ish, that those layers are gone. Those layers have been removed by site leveling, okay, which is unfortunate because we might have had an actual concrete, positive evidence answer to this question. But the findings of Lorenzo Nigro essentially establish that there was a late bronze fortification. So if we have that late bronze fortification, then the scarab of Amenhotep III, the fragment of Mycenaean ware, all that makes a bit of sense now. Because there was a city there. And there was a city there that survived. Right up until about 1220-ish, 1210-ish. In there. So, anyway. It's really, all that is just basically to say that the scarab is evidence of the fact that there was a late bronze city there. And it wasn't just destroyed by Joshua in around 1400. And frankly, this would have been really, really poor evidence anyway for a Joshua time destruction either. Anyway, because Amenhotep III is like 50 years after Amenhotep II. So, it becomes very, very problematic for Bryant Wood. Okay? So, there's actually no discrepancy here. It fits with what we know of the current archaeological data as we have it. Essentially, 1550, there was a Middle Bronze Age destruction of City 4, which included the destruction of the Cyclopean Wall. It was then rebuilt with mud brick fortifications during the Late Bronze Age, and then around 1200-ish, it is destroyed again. The site is leveled, and an Iron Age, small Iron Age village is built on top. So that's how all that data is reconciled together. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our next one is from Brick Creation, I think. Yep, for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Is it possible that the mainstream will accept the Exodus and conquest as historical sooner or later, even without believing in the supernatural account of it in the Bible? I think scholarship is already heading in that direction. Biblical maximalism is probably at its peak that we've seen in the last 50 years. Now, when I went to college and did my first archaeology course in the I'm really dating myself. I'm showing how old I am here, but it was in the very early 1990s. Okay, very early 1990s. Almost you couldn't. It was hard to find a biblical maximalist. It really was. There are almost no biblical maximalists. Minimalism was definitely the consensus position back then. That has changed. We no longer have a consensus position on this. We have now as a controversy. The minimalists have become less minimalism, less minimalist. The maximalists have become a little less maximalist as better interpretations of the material come out. So, and I think definitely one can believe in an Exodus and a conquest without believing in anything supernatural. I mean, I think a lot of the resistance to, say, a historical Exodus and conquest comes out of anti-supernaturalism more than anything else. And there's no reason why you have to read these texts in a supernaturalist way. You can read these texts like you read the Kaddish inscriptions. I mean, the Kaddish inscriptions of Ramses II are full of religious language. Ramses II says, Amun, the spirit of Amun-Re came down upon me. I was filled with this fighting spirit of Montu, and I smote the nasty Hittites. Well, that's full of religious language. It's full of religious language. Nobody's reading it that way anymore. But other than that, he was surrounded by Hittites. You can believe that at some point Ramses II was surrounded with Hittites without believing in Amun-Re or Montu. I think likewise you can actually read the Exodus account as, these people left the city in Egypt. They had a migration, came into Palestine, and they started setting up home. You can very, very much believe that without any supernatural presuppositions whatsoever. You don't have to believe you don't even have to believe in a God to believe that. To believe in the historical case. So I don't understand why there's so much resistance to this. It makes no sense. It's just silly. Yeah. But, a secular historian could easily believe in this. Just, you could believe, a secular historian could believe that, oh yeah, Moses believed in a God. Sure. Secular historian doesn't have to say, well, so does the Pope believe in God. So does Martin Luther believe in a God. Okay? Just because you know the belief of a person writing doesn't actually mean you have to believe it, even if you accept some of the historical details. So I do think once people sort of come to their historical senses here, I think there will be more acceptance of it as a historical position, even if they're not coming to it as a religious position. What I mean? We already see this happening. The pendulum is already swinging. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And it's a great question. Switch over now. Okay, our next super chat is from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he said, any new archaeological evidence for Solomon? Its publications have been slow recently. because the whole COVID thing has just made everything sort of dragged everything to a halt, even the presses. So, not a whole lot new. Any about Rehoboam and what is happening during the invasion of Jerusalem by the Pharaoh Shishak. Okay. I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think many people doubt that Shishak is Shishonk the First. And one of the things that we kind of have to keep in mind that is that Jerusalem was never invaded. It was never invaded. Shishak approached Jerusalem, but he was given a bribe to not invade Jerusalem. We have to remember that the way that Egyptian conquest works is they're really only interested in the money. Empire is expensive. Egyptians don't like expense. They're doing a lot of these conquests to shore up 3,000 years of inflation. This is one of the problems with their barter economy, is it was really, really easily subject to inflation. And the Egyptians just couldn't, and one of the reasons why it was so subject to inflation was they couldn't just print more money, because they didn't have money. So if you have a strictly barter economy, when inflation hits, it hits you hard. And that inflation shows up with shortages in everything. Things become more expensive because you have less of everything. So how they shore up this economy is they go abroad, they get goodies from Canaan, goodies from Cush, and they come back and they pour those goodies back into the economy. So when Rehoboam gives the gold to Shishak, this basically says, hey, don't invade Jerusalem. Got no reason to invade Jerusalem. He just moves on to the next town. That's how basically Rehoboam gets his, avoids the conquest of Jerusalem, is he basically pays off Shishak. And Shishak at that point has no other reason to invade. He's got his goodies and he's going home. So I think most archaeologists right now who've read, who are really sort of into the Bubastite portal, that's how they'll read it these days, especially given the accounts that we have in the Bible. Essentially, the Bible more or less says that he paid off Shishak anyway. So, once paid, they're usually good for this. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay, our next super chat is from AB for $49.99. Well, thank you very much for that very, very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. Super chats like that really help keep this channel growing, and we really appreciate it. Okay, and he says, you say the large ages of Adam is more likely clan lifespan, but in Genesis 5:5 it says all the days of Adam were 930. Could you explain? Absolutely. Part of this is, I'll keep going. Does Hebrew language say something different? Okay. The Hebrew language is silent on it because what we're missing here is the cultural component. But one of the things we do find in ancient Near Eastern cultures is there's 3 deaths. Okay, 3 deaths. Okay. And you find this in some of the poetics of the ancient Near East. There is the death of the body, death of the person. Person dies, he gets buried, he's dead. Okay? The next one is the death of memory, when people stop memorializing him. Okay? Those who remember him are no longer alive, or those who knew about him. Finally, death of the name. And that's considered to be the final death, when your name is no longer spoken. Okay? Now, in the case of a clan existence, as long as there is a direct family line, basically a clan is divided up into clades, essentially families. Okay? So within a clan, you have multiple clades. clan generally consists of a main clan, main clade, and several, say, cousin clades. Okay? Now, those cousin clades can branch off and form their new clans. Okay? But as long as the clan survives under the identity of the clan of Adam, that is considered to be that the clan is still alive. Now, we do see some odd wording in Genesis that really points to this. Like, for example, in the case of Abraham. In the case of Abraham, Abraham is born to Terah when Terah is said to be 130 years old. And it doesn't say that directly, but we figure this out because Abraham leaves Haran after the death of Terah, and he's 75, and Terah lived to 205, I believe, or something like that. Yeah, I think it's 205. So you subtract 75 from 205, and you figure out that Terah was 130. Okay, so maybe he was 130 when he gave birth to Abraham. But then Abraham, when he talks to God, and God gives him the revelation that you're going to give birth to a son, the promised son. And Abraham says, "Well, how can this be? How can a man of 100 years old give birth to a son?" Well, but your father was 130. Or was it his father? Was it his grandfather? Or great-grandfather. Terah was not the name of Abraham's father, but it was the name of his clan. And the name of the leader of that clan, the progenitor of the clan, was Terah. Terah of Urkesh. Okay? So, we know, we've been able to figure out through what's going on in the text, that these are clans, not individual ages. We also see this like in Genesis 6, where there's only, say, 3 generations over the 350-ish years that the Israelites were in Egypt. When you look at, say, the genealogy of Moses in Exodus 6. Well, 3 ancestors over 350 years. Each one averaging 130-ish years each. And those aren't individual lifespans. Those are the lifespans of clans. So the Hebrew text drops hints here and there, but it pretty much expects you to understand that they're talking about clans because that's the society they wrote in. That's the society that they were surrounded in. That's the water the fish is swimming in. Okay? So that's how we understand that these are clans. So anyway, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. I hope that answered your question. It's a fascinating subject, and once you start seeing that they're really talking a lot about clans instead of, say, families or even more so than families or tribes, sort of the scriptures kind of open up to you. It really is phenomenal. You start seeing it everywhere. It's crazy. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciate, and a great question. The Chem Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. Should we expect to find Moshe's name in hieroglyphs? Why or why not? Bonus points for explaining what it would look like in hieroglyphs. Okay. Bonus points. Let's go for bonus points. So, it will look like something like... felt pen here because that'll look better. Piece of blank paper here. Board. I've got a clipboard. All right. You want to know? Now, there are 2 theories of what is the name of Moshe. And in Egyptian, this is one of the big, it's still debated in Egyptology, what was the name of Moshe. And the two popular theories is that it is the name Mes. Mes, which means Mes, which means to be born or to be begotten of, born of, that sort of thing. And I've always found that there's some problems with this. The problem in my estimation is that the transition from an S to a sheen in Hebrew is not exactly seamless. So I don't tend to like that interpretation very much. There's another interpretation that was first proposed by Thomas Schneider. Now, he has abandoned this theory because he's come to believe in a 10th century Exodus. So he doesn't believe this theory anymore. But I think he was right that it's a theophoric name that is was Emshe. The consonants are right. We do find these examples of these in the 19th dynasty, and I think it's definitely would work here with Moses, and it would be something like you have a god named like Amun or Montu, and then followed by M, which means of, and She, which means the river or of the lake. So he would have been named something like Amun M She, and basically here to draw this. And M She and hieroglyphs would look something like this. Okay. Read into the face, so it's there. There's your M, your Albert. That's of. And you got the pool hieroglyph here, which is pronounced sh. And then you have the straight line determinative, basically saying it's a real object, not just a letter. Okay. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I hope you like the little drawing sample too. Okay. Our next super chat comes from Angel VWM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on Samson's seal found at Tel Beit Shemesh? I'd heard about this some years ago. I don't know too much about it, in all honesty. I'm aware it exists. It does seem to be, I think there was a lion inscribed on it or something like that. It's hard to know if it's original Samson. Any of these seals, like for example, we find like seals like say what the so-called Jezebel seal. Well, the problem is Jezebel is an exceptionally common name, very, very common name. Yeah, it's going to be hard to say much more about that. I don't know what the provenance of it is. I don't know where it was found, if it was found on the antiquities market or on a dig. So I don't know any background details of this, so I can't comment for any further on this. So, but I had heard of it. And Samson is actually a theophoric name. It comes from Shemesh, and it's basically a diminutive of Shemesh. It's like little sun. Shemesh being the Babylonian solar deity. Okay, so that's about all I can tell you about this. But it too probably would have had been quite common at one point, especially as Israel dipped into idolatry. So anyway, best I can do right now. I'd have to look more into this before I could comment. But thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. Angel VWM again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was there a way in ancient Hebrew to say the divine name I am and saying I am without claiming divinity? Absolutely, there was. Because it's a different verbal form. Okay. I am. There's a small shift in the verbal forms and it happens in the third consonant. So, for example, he is the divine name, Yahweh. Okay, there's a V there, or W, depending on which way you wish to pronounce it. Hebrew linguistics has switched between the V and the W from time to time. I don't get stuck up on that. Some people do. I don't. But there's a V there. Now, the regular verbal form has a yod instead on the third consonant. So it'd be yeh. So it's two different verbal forms. Both mean I am or he is. It's a copular verb. But they're spelled differently and they're pronounced differently. So one could definitely say I am without sort of causing offense very easily. You would pronounce it yeah. Okay, and that's perfectly said. That's I am, as in I am going to the store. That's sort of I am. All right. Or yeah, David. I am David. Okay. So that's very easily. But this is where, say, for example, when Jesus is in say in John 8:58, when he's in the temple and where he starts being stoned, is he chooses the other form. Before Abraham was I am. He's not using the Yod version, he's using the Vav version. And everyone in the temple knows this. And that's when they start picking up the stones and stoning him. Because they can hear the difference. It's immediate. How can you claim to have known Abraham? You're not even 50 years old yet. Has seen Abraham. You are not even 50 years old yet. Truly, truly, I say unto you, before Abraham was, Ave, or Achve. That's what he's saying in that context. And they hear it. They understand it. So yes, absolutely, you can say I am without claiming divinity. Just don't mix up your yods and your vavs, and you'll be fine. Okay. Anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for that super chat. Fascinating question. And great rabbit trail too. Because it makes another passage clear. It helps you to clarify that other John passage. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Mouthwash for $5. Good to see you here tonight, friend. It's been a while. Who saw you last week? I don't know. But anyway, good to see you here. I'm starting to lose track of the weeks. It's hot. I'm getting old. I don't have enough whiskey in my cup. All right. And he asks, what is your analysis of David Rohl's claim of Joseph's tomb being located? Are you familiar with it in his book, Pharaoh and Kings? I don't have to be familiar with it in his books, Pharaohs and Kings, because he's used that in other of his books too. It's something that he's talked about frequently. My analysis of David Rohl's claim is that it's a garbage claim. Here's what I think of his claim. Now, first of all, he's basically saying that the tomb that they found, the fragment of the Semitic statue, and he makes this statue out to be like this massive statue that no Egyptian dignitary ever built for himself. This monstrous statue that is taller than a human being. Well, you look at the site reports, and it basically claims that the statue is only about 5 feet tall. If that's a massive statue that's supposed to tower over the heads and shoulders of men, what? So there's definitely some exaggeration in these claims. Okay. The second thing about his claim is that he claims it's the tomb of Joseph because he finds 12 tombs and a palace there. Okay. Time for a little bit of reality check here. Those 12 tombs are not 12. They're like 24, 30 tombs. And that's not even counting the pan graves, just the tombs. There's a lot more than 12 tombs there. Sure, if you've got 40 tombs, you've got 12 as well. But if you're making a claim of exclusivity here that is exclusively 12 tombs, there better be 12 tombs and not more. The other thing is that quote, palace is another tomb that was built on top of the tombs of Joseph's brothers. If this is Joseph's palace, he's kind of being a jerk, you know, mowing over his brother's tombs and building on top of them. You know? I mean, the more these early daters talk about Joseph, you know, I've got some serious question of the character of Joseph that these guys are portraying, because he's starting to do some awful things. Awful things. With regularity, yeah. You know, and this would be an awful thing to do. Okay. So, yeah, I think this claim is ridiculous. It's also in the wrong time period. This tomb dates to the 13th dynasty. That's you know, according to the material culture, that would have been before Joseph's time. About 100 years. It's about 100 years before Joseph's time. So I just think that this is a tomb of a local Hyksos ruler of some kind. Could even be potentially a vizier or a high official. We don't know. We don't have enough information here. There's no inscriptions. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's one inscription, I believe, fragmentary text that says Sennacherib, which is a Hetep Dinisu inscription. But Hetep Dinisu inscriptions are found all over Egypt. There's nothing interesting about that per se, or nothing significant about that. He's a joke. Essentially, David Rule is a joke. Nothing of his actually works. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I just laugh at this claim. This claim has no credibility at all. So, thank you very much. Hey, the Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Not sure how to word this one, but how does Israel's status as the chosen people apply after Messiah's first coming? I assume that they are still chosen, but how does it relate to Messianic believers? Okay. The whole chosen people thing is basically Israel was supposed to be a kingdom of priests. They were essentially supposed to be God's first evangelists. Their job was to take the religion of Yahweh to the nations. And they were supposed to. They weren't supposed to just hang around Israel all the time. They were supposed to go out in the world, interact with Gentiles, basically tell them about Yahweh. They failed in that mission, and it was fulfilled through Messiah and the church. But as chosen people, they still have that opportunity to be a nation of priests. You know, to go out into the nations, telling them about Jesus Christ. And we do know when Messianic believers do this, that they are often exceptionally gifted in this regard. It's a very powerful witness. Now, I'm not talking about some of these silly Messianic believers that, you know, wear Jesus on their sleeve as if it was a costume. I mean, I'm not talking about those type. But I'm talking about, you know, people of, say, Israelite or Jewish heritage that have discovered Messiah and use use the fact that they are resting in thousands and thousands of years of history to go out into the world and share Messiah and Yahweh to the entire world. So, indeed, they are still chosen. They have a special place in the salvation history plan. Very special place. They still have to come to Messiah the same way the rest of us do, which is by grace through faith. Okay? They still have to come to Messiah the same way. But once they have that grace and faith, they can then spread it in ways that Gentiles are not except often gifted at. So anyway, that's my opinion on this. Having worked with Messianic Jews, I have seen this often happen. As I say, once they sort of get that sort of missionary bent, they're practically unstoppable. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and very much appreciate the question. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. I also want to give out a shout out to his channel too, which is, let me see if I can find it here. I started watching his review tonight of the interview between Sean McDowell and Dr. Kennedy, and it is called Linguist Ammo. So I want to give a shout out to his channel. Go watch his channel and watch his commentary on the interview. It's quite interesting. I haven't gotten completely through it yet. I'm only 22 minutes into it. But I think what I've seen so far has been excellent, and I really am enjoying it. But anyway, he asks, if you play D&D, what character, class, race would you be? I can tell you what I used to play, because I did play D&D. I used to play a lot of it. I used to play a magic user. I used to play a wizard. Half elven race. Class, again, magic user. That was for sort of the characters I used to play. Half elves. Okay, and he says, continues, if you don't, then what is your favorite tomb in Egypt? Mine is TT1 of Sennacherib. Ooh. What is my favorite tomb in Egypt? That's a tough question. Sennacherib's is pretty good, I will have to admit. And that one's hard to beat. That one is excellent. Rekhmiray's is very interesting. TT100. That's a very, very interesting. The Tomb of Ramosa is fabulous. It's in the tombs among the tombs of the nobles. I don't remember the Theban tomb designation for that, but the Tomb of Ramosa is excellent. Highly recommend the Tomb of Ramosa. The only other tomb that sort of I really, really love is actually the Pyramid of Zoser. Now, I normally hate pyramids. That's an exception. That one is super interesting in so many ways. I was in it the only time I've ever been inside that tomb was during when they just opened it up after the restoration in 2021. And you actually had to go in through a Dynasty 21-22 passage that had been carved in the side. But you get to the burial chamber. And you look out into the burial chamber and you get vertigo. It's a long ways down. The burial chamber of Zoser is huge. You look at it on the maps and it doesn't seem so big, but it is massive. It's a cavern. It's a cavern inside that pyramid. And you see little sections where tunnels intersect with that cavern. It's kind of like, it's almost like you're in Moria. and there's all these little passages and tunnels and all that all over the place. I mean, it is quite literally a maze underneath that pyramid. It's full of galleries and shafts and passages, and it's crazy. It is a crazy tomb, and you can see there's also a sarcophagus at the bottom of the burial chamber. It's still there. It's still there. It's been reconstructed to some part. But very, very interesting tomb. Very interesting tomb. Not decorated. I usually prefer tombs that are decorated, but this one is so interesting and so not so that you can't help but be amazed once you see inside of it. It's just very, very interesting. So anyway, that is my opinion of some of the best tombs in Egypt. Again, Ramos is great. And I agree with you on Senedjum, and Rekmarais is pretty awesome too. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and very much appreciate it. Okay, our next super chat is from Sinaikas Apologia for $100. Thank you very much for that really, really generous super chat. You guys really, you really support us. You really help us this channel, and you basically keep us afloat. And we are so appreciative of this because it allows us to do things that that we couldn't otherwise do. As many of you do know, I do have a day job. I basically have a manual labor job that I use to pay the rent, and it's not the easiest job to work. Scheduling is very difficult sometimes, but super chats like this do allow me to occasionally take a day off from that to do things such as interviews. For example, we are trying to arrange a interview on Sean McDowell's channel. He's reached out to us, and we are right now in negotiations to arrange a time to conduct this interview. But for me to do this, I have to take a day off of work to have the time to actually do this interview. So without super chats like this, it would make it next to impossible. So I very, very much appreciate your super chats because it really helps us to do more on this channel in a really real and tangible way. Okay, and he asks, did the Egyptians ever adopt any foreign gods or made connections with foreign gods, i.e. claiming that a certain Greek god were actually Egyptian gods? Yes, they actually adopted foreign gods with quite some regularity. If a god from somewhere else didn't sort of contradict the metaphysics, like for example, they wouldn't. If a god claims to be a monotheistic god, they kind of avoided it. Okay, so they didn't because that just upsets the whole polytheistic system in Egypt. But if it didn't contradict that explicitly, they had no problems adopting a foreign god. Like, for example, the dwarf god Bes. He's not a native god of Egypt, but he comes into the Egyptian pantheon sometime around the Middle Kingdom. Now, we're not exactly sure if he's an African god or if he's a Canaanite god, but he gets around. And he's a nasty god. In Egypt, Bes is the god of childbirth. When he starts spreading around the Mediterranean, he becomes god of child sacrifice. So, there is that where they will just pick up gods and add them to the pantheon without much consideration. They adopted Resheph, Baal, and Astarte, Canaanite gods. They had no problems incorporating that into their pantheons. And they did that around the Second Intermediate period. So absolutely, they would take foreign gods and incorporate it into the pantheon. Now, in the case of say Greek gods, they sometimes did merge them with the local Egyptian deities. Like, for example, they would they took name now was it Asclepius? and merged with I think it was Serapis, or Mercury with Horus. They would do that during the Ptolemaic period, but that's things are starting to get really strange as far as religion at that time anyway. So they would merge it, but they wouldn't actually claim that they were originally Egyptian gods. So it was more of a oh, you're worshiping this god. This is our god version of it. We'll just merge them in because they're the same god. That was more the attitude. It wasn't that they claimed, oh, you're worshiping King of the Gods, Zeus. We worship the King of the Gods, Amun-Re. Zeus is really Amun-Re. No, they don't do that. They typically don't do that. They'll typically merge them in and claim it's the same god under the cover. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. This is definitely less controversial than the hot dog schism, the Great Hot Dog Schism. But I do very, very much appreciate the question. Very much appreciate the generous super chat. As I said, it's really going to help us. It really, really helps us to do things we couldn't otherwise do. So thank you so very much, and have a great night. Hey. Cataphracт3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What's the reasoning behind Leviticus 15:19? I read it's due to ancient ideas of blood polluting the land. Okay, let's pull that up and so let's take a look here at Leviticus. Five, 15:19. Oh, okay. It's not about blood polluting the land. All right. I understand what's going on here. And actually, to explain this better, we're actually going to go back to 18, because this is, I think, helps us. 18 actually helps us understand what's happening in 19. Okay. 18. If a man lies with a woman so that there is a seminal emission, they shall both bathe in water and be unclean until evening. We actually have the night emission in here. That will even tells us even. Yes, okay, we'll start at 16 because that's even more telling. Now, if a man has a seminal emission, basically a night emission, this is going to get PG-13, people, so don't complain to the YouTube censors because you've already been warned. Goes on. He shall bathe all his body in water and be unclean until evening. As for any garment or any leather on which there is seminal emission, it shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. If a man lies with a woman so that there is seminal emission, they shall both bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Verse 19. When a woman has a discharge, if her discharge in her body is blood, she shall continue her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her be unclean until evening. Everything also on which she lies during her menstrual impurity shall be unclean, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, and anyone who touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. And that's probably all we need. All right. So here's what's going on here. It's not about blood polluting the land. That's not what's happening here. What we have here is the difference between normal and abnormal. Okay? And basically, what is the normal sexual state versus what is the abnormal sexual state? And that's what we mean here by clean and unclean. Okay? Unclean is the state where tame, where it's abnormal. It's just not a normal function. Okay, we should, for a man, a seminal emission is not the normal state. So, but it's also quickly, resolved. So he returns to the normal state, after a very short period of time, until evening, essentially. And we would call this, physiologists would call this the refractory period. The time it takes for a man to be able to do it again, essentially. Okay, so the refractory period for a man is very, very short. It's about a day, roughly. In the case of a woman, you can't actually, not all women's periods are of the same length. So the abnormal state for the woman is that that's 7 days. Now, in real biology, it's possibly less. In fact, in most cases, it's less, but it could be up to that length. So it's a way of basically saying, okay, she is not in a normal state, so she is ritually unclean. So that's what we're talking about here is ritual uncleanliness, not the land being polluted, not any of that stuff. And frankly, it's a good excuse to take a break. She doesn't have to work those 7 days. She doesn't have to go out the fields and labor for those 7 days. Doesn't have to put up with kids or her husband. Sounds like a pretty good deal. You get 1 week of a month of kicking your feet up and just resting. People think that that's a broad deal. It sounds, for the ancient world, unheard of. In Egypt, women were expected to work whatever their state was. You give birth, you're still working in the field. You put it in a basket and move on. The baby's there right beside you. You just gave birth, and you still have to cut the barley. It's just like there's not going to be any break for you in Egypt. So actually, this has nothing to. In my opinion, this has nothing to do with polluting the land. It just has everything to do with normal and abnormal. And I still think it's a pretty good deal for the woman. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay, and next is the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was the Star of Bethlehem present at Messiah's birth or only when the Magi came from the east? If at his birth, could it be used to get a rough date? Okay. Here are my thoughts on this. And basically, since a few weeks ago we were asked about, I think it was Revelation 9, where it talks about the sun being in the valley of the Virgin and the moon and the 12 stars. And I've come to thinking about that a lot. And at the time I said I didn't like the whole archaeoastronomy interpretation of that. I still don't like the archaeoastronomy interpretation of that. In fact, I even think it's worse now. Because I did find a relevant passage to that, of that imagery in Genesis. It's the dream of Joseph, essentially. Okay? The dream of Joseph says, he dreams of the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, and the 12 stars are 11 stars are bowing down towards him. It's Joseph's dream. Okay? It's Joseph's dream. Yeah, someone pointed out it's Revelation 12. So yeah, Revelation 12. So it's essentially it's Old Testament imagery. It's exactly Joseph's dream. Okay? So, I always hate the use of archaeoastronomy. Always hate it. And the more I learn about archaeoastronomy, the less I like it. There was a time when I was actually fairly favorable to it, but it just sort of bottoms out. Bottoms out every time people use it. Now, we are supposing the star was present, at least from the narrative, when the Magi came from the east. So this is already long after the birth of Christ, approximately 1 or 2 years after. So this, it's not like we see in the nativity, the creches, the nativity creches. The birth of Christ looked nothing like a nativity creche, nothing like that at all. Well, I should use my art skills to make my own nativity creche, as it would have been ancient. Yeah, go on another sacred cow barbecue. Do a real nativity creche as it actually would have looked like in ancient Israel. Hmm? Oh yeah, yeah. Give him a quick sketch. Well, maybe another time. Maybe another time. Okay. So, but anyway, yeah, I was thinking of doing that someday as just a real nativity scene as it would have looked like in the ancient world. But the Magi wouldn't have been there. Okay, they wouldn't have been there. They came after, and quite a long time after they left the inn. So they're already settled in a home when the Magi come. Magi come. Okay. So it's not at his birth. So even if you could figure out which star it was, you wouldn't be able to calculate it or get a rough date according to his birth. So you wouldn't get that at all, because it's just so much after. It's so much after. So it's one of those things where people have tried to do this. Again, here's one of those points of departure I take from Michael Heiser. Michael Heiser has a lot of good stuff. I don't agree with his interpretation of Revelation 12, and I do not believe that this is an astrological event that could point to the date of Christ's birth. I just don't buy it. And that's because we do have really good, satisfactory Old Testament symbolism that will fill that interpretation better than some corny archaeoastronomical machination. So, yeah, even if you could do it, you wouldn't get the birth anyway, because it comes much after. All right. So, anyway, I want to thank you for the question. I want to thank you for that super chat. Yeah, it was only present to guide the Magi, and it came much later. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and thank you very much for the question. Okay. Angel VWM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think life was like for Moses growing up, being raised by Egyptians, but not being one of them? Okay. There's some interesting stuff about this. I think it was very different for Moses. Now, Moses grew up in the house of the Ramesside clan. So he's grown up in the house of the Ramesside clan. He would have lived probably in the palace at Avaris. Now, when we say palace at Avaris, we have to understand that there were palaces built all over Egypt. They're all Egypt. And the king almost never went to them. Almost never went to them. The purpose of these palaces was to provide administrative buildings for the local officials. And it was the local officials that lived at those palaces. In the case of the question or the palace at Avaris, this was the home of, say, the vizier of Lower Egypt. In the case during the reigns of Horemheb, that would have been Ramses I. So Ramses I and his family lived in that palace at Avaris. So that's probably the place where Moses grew up. The palace of Horemheb at Avaris. So, and we don't have much of that left today. Most of it was sheared off by agricultural leveling. But we still have the foundation bricks of that. So if you wanted to find out, if you want to know where Moses actually probably would have stood at one point, go to that palace. That's probably where he lived as a child. So you could go there and you could just walk through that if it's even available, because again, these are agricultural fields. But in there, you would have been able to, at some point, walk across someplace that Moses himself had walked. So he would have had, but he wouldn't have actually been that cut off from the local population either. Growing up at Avaris, he would have, come in contact with the local population. He probably would have picked up the local dialect. So he would have spoken the Semitic dialect, the Amoritic Semitic dialect. He would have had contact with other Amoritic Semites. He would have also lived in a pretty good circumstances. He would have lived in as essentially a royal residence. Life would have been pretty good for him there, honestly, compared to the rest of what Egyptians had and what they and the relative poverty. He would have been a lot better off. There would have still been that sort of divide between Egyptian and Semite, like they don't eat together. Egyptians don't eat with foreigners. And that he would have had that prejudice as growing up with an Egyptian, and Egyptians around him would have considered him Egyptian. Okay. But he also wasn't sequestered either. And that's another thing, too. Because he wasn't actually the son of a king at the time, he wasn't ever a son of a king, but he wasn't at that point considered the son of a daughter of a king, because Ramses I hadn't become king. He wouldn't have been sequestered from the rest of the Avaris either. He would have had access to the town. He would have had access to the fields. He could have walked around. He wasn't sequestered like, for example, the royal harem at Thebes was. Life would have been very, very different if he had been part of the royal, included inside the royal premises in, say, Thebes. He would have been sequestered at that point from the rest of the population, at least until he came of age. So it was different. Moses's growing up was different than your typical Semite in Avaris. But it also wasn't as removed as, say, being raised in the royal palace at Thebes, the imperial capital. Avaris wasn't an imperial capital. It was a capital of a region. It was a local. It was a basically the sort of the capital of Lower Egypt at that time. So anyway, I hope that fills some of the details in. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How do you reconcile Exodus 25:9 and Hebrews 8:5 with the idea that the tabernacle taking its design from the Egyptians? Okay, let's pull that up and let's read the verse. Okay. Exodus 25. Okay. And God says in Exodus 25, verse 9, according to all that I'm going to show you as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, just so you shall construct it. All right. And Hebrews 8:5. Okay. And who shall serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things, just as Moses was warned by God when he was about to erect the tabernacle? For see, he says that you make things according to the pattern which was shown to you on this mountain. Okay. Now, here's how I'd reconcile this. First of all, these are copies and shadows. These are not direct equivalents. That's an important thing here. The second thing is that when we talk about the pattern of the tabernacle, its design is similar to what the Egyptians are doing because God is relating to what the Israelites already know. Let's say you move to, I don't know, Dayton, Ohio. We're just picking a random city. Dayton, Ohio. And you hire a carpenter to build you a house. Okay. And, you give him a couple $100,000, build him a house, and you come back and you find an igloo. A nice dome building that's used by the Inuit. So, wait. I hired you to build a house. Carpenter goes, I did build you a house. It's a house of ice, but it's a house. You didn't say what kind of house. Well, you'd be understandably confused because it's not what you conceive a house to be. Because the carpenter is using a house of a different culture. And it would melt very quickly, too. He'll be jealous. He'll leave you ice carving tools to rebuild your house. But it's not something you would expect. Okay? It's the same deal. God is using something that the Israelites would expect when coming up with the design of the tabernacle. It's not de novo. It's not from scratch. It's not from out of nothing. You go to temples all over the world, and they're all slightly different. If God said, "Hey, my heavenly temple looks exactly like this one in Kyoto, Japan. Build it like this," they would go, "Well, what are we supposed to do with this? What's the purpose of a big red gate?" The culture is not equivalent. This is a form of what we call condescension. Basically, God is meeting man in the middle. Okay? God is meeting us halfway. He is basically using the copy and the shadow in the temporal things to allude to greater truth, greater realities. It's not a one-to-one equivalent. Okay? So when God tells the people to do it exactly this way, he is compromising. He's basically telling them, first of all, he's telling them, yes, you are able to do it this way. Okay? He's giving them something, a way of having rapport in a way that's within their abilities. He's not giving them an impossible thing. God's not saying, it better look exactly what I see in heaven or else. Okay? That's not what's going on here. Not what's going on here. That's very, very frightening if God said, "Oh, I'm not going to give you any pictures, but it better look exactly like heaven or else." Lightning bolts. Oh no, that's not what's going on here. So he's basically taking it's basically similar. It's a shadow. It's a copy. It's a simulacra. It's meant to allude to a heavenly reality, but it isn't the same as the heavenly reality itself. Okay? So that's how I reconcile it. He's taking what the Israelites best knew and adapted it to be a copy and a shadow. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's a good question. It's one I have actually received before, but it is something that people do struggle with. So especially when they start learning about the stuff for the first time. So a lot of people just go, they sort of, what? The Ark of the Covenant is like Egyptian ritual furniture? I thought they weren't supposed to be like Egyptian. I thought these plans came directly from God. And they're all new. Brand new. It's like, oh, no, you still have to relate to them on their terms. You know, like, if you told to to an ancient Israelite, in the Sinai desert, yeah, just get into a car and drive to Tel Aviv. Well, they would go, "What's a car and what's Tel Aviv?" They wouldn't know. It's not part of their vocabulary or their knowledge. You have to explain it to them in terms they understand. And that's what God did, is he was explaining himself to the Israelites in a compassionate way that they would understand. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Cambrit for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Genesis 15, 4-5 makes the word of the Lord sound almost humanoid. Is this a theophany? If so, could this be the angel of the Lord? Thanks. God bless. Okay, let's get that Bible up again. And go to Genesis. $15, 4-5. All right, and I'll start verse 3. And Abraham said, Since thou hast given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir, but one who shall come from your own body, he shall be your heir. And he took him outside and said, Now look towards the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to them, So shall your descendants be. Verse 6, Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Okay. Okay. Now, this is a theophany. Very likely. Very likely a theophany. If so, could this be the angel of the Lord? Also possible. There's the whole idea of the identity of the angel of the Lord. Many times theophanies are angels of manifestations of the angels of the Lord are considered to be theophanies. So angel here is not necessarily talking about, say, the lower spiritual being like the cherubim or the seraphim. Angel here just means messenger. When you see the term angel of the Lord, it usually just is a reference to messenger of the Lord. So, whatever manifestation of the messenger of the Lord here could be anything from potentially an angel to a theophany. Okay? Now, in this particular case, it is a theophany, because the Lord spoke to Abram directly. So this is a theophany. It's a manifestation of God, and that's particularly Yahweh, and that's what was being spoken here, is the words of that manifestation. Now, it may not, I don't know if the text explicitly says angel of the Lord here, but it doesn't look like it, but, depending on how we're defining angel of the Lord, it's possible it could also be a manifestation of the angel of the Lord, depending on how you define it. As I said, angel of the Lord could mean a multiple number of things, among which includes theophanies. So, the answer to your question 1 is yes, it is a theophany. The answer to question number 2 is maybe, because angel of the Lord is a particularly broad term. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now, I don't know if this is supposed to be OS or Oz, but he gives us $10. Thank you very much for that super chat. And he says, in the video with IP refuting objections to the biblical Exodus, you said Egypt had periods of hyperinflation. Oh boy, did it. Could you explain how this could happen when they had a barter and precious metal economy? Oh, very, very easy. Now, inflation, what happens with inflation is something gets more expensive through either demand or, supply, demand, cost, etc. Now, in traditional economics, where you have a non-barter economy, where you have money, let's say you have 10 jelly beans, and that's all the jelly beans you have. Okay? And you have $10. Your whole economy consists of a currency of pool of $10. Well, let's say if all your assets are jelly beans and all your money is dollars, okay, how much does a jelly bean cost? Okay, how much does a jelly bean cost? Well, it costs $1. Okay, now let's say your supply of jelly beans goes down. Let's say people eat half the jelly beans. Okay, so now you're reduced to 5 jelly beans. How much do those jelly beans cost now? They're now $2 a piece. Supply has gone down. And demand goes up. Those now cost more money. Okay? So that's how inflation works in, say, a monetary economy. Is your amount of currency outstrips the supply of your jelly beans. And this can happen too, like, for example, even if the supply doesn't go down. So let's say you still got your 10 jelly beans. But now the government wants to print more money. It's in debt. It's in trouble. It's got a jelly bean crisis. And now the government prints $10 more. So now there's $20 for your 10 jelly beans. Okay? Initially, that's going to sound really good because there's now more money to spend on things. But ultimately, those jelly beans are going to end up inflating in cost. So each jelly bean is now worth $2. There's 2 ways you can create inflation here: by reducing the supply of goods or increasing the supply of currency, printing more money. That's how inflation works. Okay? Now, in a non-barter economy, remove the currency. Each jelly bean is worth 1 jelly bean. But you still have a limited supply of jelly beans. So now you have 10 jelly beans. Okay. Let's say the people get hungry and eat half the jelly beans. A jelly bean is still a jelly bean, but now it's a lot more in demand. Less of them. There's scarcity. And in a barter economy, you're going to trade for some other good. So let's say, for example, instead of money, you're now trading it for a debit of bronze, a tool, a sack of wheat. Okay? Each of those jelly beans is going to become more expensive relative to other goods because the supply is limited, because the supply is diminished. And this is what happens in the Egyptian economy during its times of hyperinflation. During its times of hyperinflation, everything becomes more expensive relative to everything else because the supply of everything is less. And that's how hyperinflation happens in a barter economy. And that's how it happened in Egypt. What happened in Egypt was it had a lot of inflation, had a lot of mouths to feed. People ate lots and lots of jelly beans and lots of sacks of wheat, and they didn't have enough. So what the government would do is they would go to, say, Canaan, Cush, and they would, even to Nubia, and they would take jelly beans from the of the Canaanites, take jelly beans from the Nubians, take jelly beans from the Cushites. The Libyans didn't have any good jelly beans. They only have those black all sorts that nobody ever wants. Things wanted the Libyans to stay away and keep their all sorts. Nasty things. Okay, so they're bringing all these jelly beans from other countries in. Well, during the time of Ramses III, that hegemony starts getting cut off. Egypt is no longer able to collect tribute from Canaan, from Cush, from Nubia. There's no longer that influx of goods, that tribute, to offset the relative expense of things. So everything starts spiking in cost. And this is what we see happening during the reign of Ramses III. Is the price of everything goes through the roof. And the situation under Ramses III gets so bad that he's dealing with labor strikes, workers' revolts, all sorts of social strife and tension happening under the reign of Ramses III because of the cost of things. And eventually what happens is Ramses III gets assassinated. And one of his sons from a minor queen tries to claim the throne, but doesn't make it. And we read about this in the harem conspiracy of trial under Ramses IV. And then under Ramses IV, he loses the hegemony entirely. It's not a process he can stop. And at that point, the Egyptian economy just goes into the toilet. It's a lost cause at that point. And there's starvation, it ultimately leads to the instability caused by this ultimately will lead to the downfall of Dynasty 20. And it's one of those times when just the economics of the situation cannot be controlled. Okay? So anyway, I hope that explains how inflation can happen in a barter economy and how it did happen in Egypt. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Fast. Okay. Capital lever for $2. These are the bonus points, winky face. I guess I get extra bonus points for my artistic skills. My parents said art skills would come in handy someday. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And the bonus points. Okay. Mouthwash for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. As a manual laborer, how do you recommend it for Christians today? Are your coworkers of better character, more resistant to the world than white collars? Oh no. Oh heck no. Surely better than a snake pit of the academia. Oh no, not where I work. I'll take the snake pit of the academy any day over where I'm working right now. Where I'm working right now is a real challenge. Spiritually. I'm not going to say where I work. I'm not going to say who I work with. The company I work for is exceptionally PC and woke. Exceptionally PC and woke. And yeah, it's it would be hard for me to vouch for I mean, some of the people I work with are really nice. There's some people I work with that I really enjoy. Many of them I wouldn't trust any further than I could throw them. So it would depend. It would really depend on the individual. But just because I work as a manual laborer does not mean that my coworkers have any better character or more resistant to the world. In fact, if anything, they're basically plunged themselves into the world. So, the snake pit of the academy is much more genteel. There's rules of engagement that you wouldn't find at a company that's driven by wokeness and perceptions of political correctness. It's a dangerous place to work. It's a dangerous place to work. So, yeah, well, that's enough said. That's enough said. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Angel VWM for $2. May I ask what's on your necklace? Very curious. Okay, well, sure. I'll show you what's on my necklace. What's on my necklace? This is my wedding ring. Okay, this is my wedding ring. I made it myself. Okay. At the time I met my my fiance, then to soon to become my wife, I was a art jeweler. Okay, so I made my own jewelry, and I made art knives and objects of art. And this particular wedding ring is a combination. You can't see it on the camera very well. It's kind of hard to see anyway. But it's a bicolored metal. So it has both rose gold and yellow gold on it. And it's very heavy. It's a very heavy ring. But because it is uses a two-tone gold, you can't resize it. Okay? They're almost multicolored gold is incredibly difficult to resize. Now, one of the things about the fact that I can't resize it is when I got married, I weighed 280 pounds. I was very heavy back then. Okay? I'll tell you that an IT job does not do good things for the waistline. Definitely not. Since then, I have lost a lot of weight. Okay? I've lost a lot of weight. And because I've lost so much weight, the ring doesn't fit on my finger anymore. And I would move it around various fingers and, trying to keep it on my hands. And, that was just a losing proposition. I just could not. It would slip off too easy. So I solved the problem by putting it on a chain. Okay? So anyway, that is what's on my necklace. It's my wedding ring. And I value it incredibly much. So, and it's on one of these, as a jeweler, I used to get these chains, these steel chains, and this chain is steel. This thing will not break. I've had many of these, and these chains do not break. So it's on a very, very secure chain as well. So, anyway, that's my necklace. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Aleko for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. This is for the ducks laugh out loud. Well, I hope you guys are having a good time as you watch these. these live streams. You know, I mean, one of the things we wanted our channel to be is both educational and entertaining. Okay, so we do want you guys to have a good time, and we want to have a good time when we do it. And you know, my laugh isn't forced. You know, it's just natural because it's just I find this stuff entertaining too. I mean, I love what I do. Honestly, I love working on ancient Egypt and the Bible. I think this is fascinating stuff. I think it's fascinating. I think it's entertaining. I think it's interesting, and I want to share that passion. I want to, and I think, you know, if I can keep my viewers awake as I share that passion, they might learn something too. So, you know, I try to have a good time here in doing it. So I very, very much appreciate the super chat, and I'm glad that, you know, you're liking the laugh too. So thank you very much for the super chat. I really, really appreciate it. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, what year of Horemheb's reign do you think Moshe would have fled? Just a rough guesstimation. I would estimate sometime around, say, the 12th to 14th year of his reign. So right around the end of his reign. Okay? That would make put Moses roughly aged around, let's see, I reigned 4 years, so he'd be roughly 16 to 18 at the time. I don't buy the idea that the 340s of Moses' life were literal 40 years. I think this is just, again, the 40 idiom coming into play here. So I think he was around between say 16 and 18, maybe 20th, possibly, when he was forced to leave. So I would put that at the end of Horemheb's 14-year reign. Okay, so this is it, between the 12th and 14th year, in all likelihood. Any younger than that, any earlier than that, Moses would not have been old enough to have survived the travails of the Sinai wilderness. You know, if he's 18, he's like in the prime of his strength. He's got a good chance of making it. He's got a good chance of making it at that point. So that's what I would guesstimate. And he basically stays out there until the reign of Ramses II when he returns. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat, and I hope that answered your question. But I think you're right. You've clued into it was during Horemheb's reign, because Horemheb is a law and order kind of pharaoh, totally a law and order kind of pharaoh. Horemheb hated corruption of the upper class, hated it, and Moses, having grown up in the house of Ramses I, would not have cut him any slack at all under the reign of Horemheb. You know, even though Horemheb and Ramses I were good friends, any murder in his friend's family would have had some very dire consequences. He's just that kind of king. So anyway, thank you very much for this super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And again, I hope that answered your question. Okay. What else we got here? I didn't skip over this too quickly. All right. Kwame Adu 007 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he writes, "Hi, Dr. Falk. Who do you think wrote Genesis 1 to 11? When and where do you think it was written and why? Thanks as always." Okay. Now, it's a good question. I don't necessarily think it was written in Babylon. I know that there are scholars out there, even conservative scholars, that think Genesis 1 to 11 was written in Babylon. And that is a lot of that has to do with the supposed interaction between like Enuma Elish, the Tale of Gilgamesh, um, um, and other, say, Babylonian literature. The problem here I have with this is that it's not specific to any piece of Babylonian literature. I find that could easily be explained also by, say, a combination of intertextual sources. It would have been clear that, say, Moses would have had access to a lot more literature than we, say, find in the ground today. He would have had access to Akkadian documents. He would have read Akkadian, having grown up as a scribe. So he would have, even in Egypt, had access to, say, Gilgamesh. He would have had access to the literature of Egypt. I just see too many sort of crossovers, not just with, say, Mesopotamian literature, but also Egyptian literature. So because I find crossovers of both Mesopotamian and Egyptian literature, that sort of leads me to think that, say, Genesis 1 to 11 is possibly was possibly written by either Moses or, say, one of his scribes or amanuensis. And Moses would not have been the only scribe to be leaving during the Exodus. There'd be others as well. Not many, but others. So I do think that there would have been those who had the capability of doing this, just from the access to the various literature that would have been extant at the time. And we know that literature went both ways. We know that Levantine literature entered into Egypt. We also know that Egyptian literature entered into the Levant. So given that, there's no reason to just assume that, if they had been in Egypt, they would have been isolated from Mesopotamian literature. And the reason I say that is because we do find Akkadian documents from time to time in Egypt. Sometimes we find them in scriptoriums, and that's where we most likely find them. Like, for example, the Amarna letters. There's some fragments of First Dynasty Babylonian tablets that were found in the scriptorium at Avaris. So they are rare, but we do find them from time to time. So anyway, now, given that I think it could be possibly Moses or his scribes who at least wrote source documents for Genesis 1 through 11. When and where do I think it was written and why? Now, in some ways, that's almost an easier question. What Moses is doing is creating an anti-myth. Now, what's an anti-myth? You've got a bunch of people coming out of Egypt, the mixed multitude. Each one of those has their own nationality, their own creation myths, their own religions, their own gods. How do you reunite all of those people under as one nation? You create an anti-myth. Anti here being instead of myth. Okay? An anti-myth is something you do to replace a myth or a bunch of myths. So Moses is writing something here that addresses a panoply of different myths. Some Mesopotamian, some Egyptian, some Levantine, anything that he might have had sort of access to in sort of the general pool of ideas that, say, the culture was awash in. So he's basically, and if you look at how this is structured, how Genesis 1 through 11 is structured, you can see those remnants of anti-myth, where it's really and the whole book of Genesis is written like this. It's not just Genesis 1 through 11. The whole book of Genesis is structured to give a background story to the new nation, to replace what was many nations and make them one. This is why we find something as odd as the Table of Nations here. The Table of Nations isn't there by accident. It's not random mythologies thrown in just to make it sound good. It's that many of the people who are coming out of Egypt with the Israelites are part of those nations. And they have to find their place as now the one nation. It's that whole grafting together exercise that Genesis is trying to manage. And I don't think it was one, say, linear composition. I think this was many different compositions that were, say, basically left to Joshua as a stack of documents. And, basically Joshua's given, hey, here's our origin stack. Hey, here's our Exodus stack. Hey, here's the Deuteronomy law. And Deuteronomy might have been supplemented later by other scribes too. I mean, that's possible as well. But, he probably would have gotten some documents from Moses, because we do see that where it says, Moses said X in Deuteronomy. Here's the stack for numbers, and, make sense of it. So that's what I think Genesis is. I think it's a nation-building exercise. It's a nation-building exercise. It's meant to show a common anti-myth that can then be used for the entire nation. And that's why I think it does seem to be that's why I think it does seem to be, follow in the sequence it does, and why its priorities are what it is. Okay? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very, very much appreciated. And again, it's again to get them thinking in a certain way. I mean, just another little tidbit. This is why, for example, Genesis 1 and 2 are structured around temple ideology. Temples, tabernacles, sacred spaces. All of this is being addressed in Genesis 1 and 2. It's to get people ready for tabernacle worship. That's not an accident. That's getting people ready for tabernacle worship. And later on, temple worship. But Moses has got to give them a justification for, hey, why should you go for, why should there be sacred space? Because of the fall of man. Fall of man. This is what happens when sacred space is violated. So it all makes sense, but it makes sense because it's an exercise in getting people to think the right way. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. OS again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, thank you. In the same video, you also talked about later pharaohs not being able to build pyramids because of the cost of labor. Oh, yeah. Couldn't they use slaves or entice people with the honor of it? Nope. Look, you got to feed these people somehow. And that's the rub here. You've got to feed these people. The harder the labor, and frankly, they did use a lot of slaves, especially the Middle Kingdom. During the Middle Kingdom, pyramids, as a cost-cutting measure, are made of mud brick. Okay? And then sort of paved on the outside with hard stone. Now, they got slaves to build the mud brick. And they could build pyramids that way. They didn't last very long. They're not as solid and not as permanent as the pure stone pyramids. But, that was a cost-cutting measure. The kings of Egypt did cut costs when building pyramids. I mean, they're not that much different from the penny pitching managers of today. You know, you cut costs when things get too expensive, and they did the same thing. But the problem is, you could get slaves to do it, but you still have to feed them. You know, you still have to provide clothing for them. You still have to do everything that you need to do to, you know, keep them alive. And that costs grain. So yeah, they could use slaves, but they still have to feed them. You would even have to do that even if you enticed people for free labor. You'd still have to feed them. And that's the big expense in ancient Egypt, is the cost of feeding. So you can make the structure simpler to build, or you can make it smaller. And that's what happened is stone pyramids were replaced by mud brick pyramids, which got smaller and smaller and smaller until they did away with the pyramids altogether and did rock cut tombs. And again, it just boiled down to what's cheaper. What's cheaper to do? And that's really what's why you know, they couldn't just use free labor, because it wasn't just the cost of labor. They're not paying these people a wage; they're paying them in food. And everybody in Egypt was paid in food, generally. So, yeah. And this is why they had that Ramses III had the worker strike at Deir el-Medina. Because what happened was that their shipments of food stopped. Shipments of food stopped. People were hungry, and they got very upset very quickly. They were still expected to build the tombs of the kings. You know, they're still expected to build the tombs of the kings, but without the supply of food coming in, the labor stops. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the second super chat, and I hope this answered it. Very much appreciate the question and the super chat. Angel VWN for $10. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very nice ring. Well, thank you very much. Had to change my profile pic to my necklace now. Okay, cool. Awesome. Question. What are the biggest misconceptions about ancient Egypt, and what annoys you the most? Biggest misconception, I think, one that sort of annoys me the most. Now, probably, I'm not going to cite the ancient aliens here, because that really isn't a misconception. That's just a distortion. The biggest misconception that I think annoys me the most is the whole idea that Egypt had an empire. An ironclad empire that couldn't be broken. That one annoys me the most, because it's so wrong. Egypt did not have an ironclad empire. You know, when we look at, say, for example, the Amarna letters, it's clear from the Amarna letters that as long as Akhenaten got his tribute, he didn't care about what happened in the eternal politics of Canaan. They could have killed each other. He didn't care. You know, basically, give us money. Give us our tribute, and you can do whatever you want. You can kill each other all you want, as long as we get our tribute. Okay? So it's really, I mean, even when we look at, say, for example, the garrison towns in Canaan, the largest garrison town was really only about 1,000 people. It wasn't very big. You know, and if you figure, okay, garrison town, 1,000 people, half of those people are scribes. They're paper pushers. They're bureaucrats. All they're there to do is make sure that the tribute is collected, it's tabulated, reports are written, the accounts are balanced. They're paper pushers. Okay. Well, okay, half of them are paper pushers. And their dependents. The other half are soldiers, maybe. Okay. Half of those maybe charioteers, and the people needed to take care of the horses. The other half are other remaining 250 are maybe foot soldiers. That's not really very many soldiers to keep a region under control. Really. And these garrison towns were sort of peppered throughout Canaan. So, there weren't a lot of them out there. So, really, that's all these guys did. Is essentially, they would ride their chariots from place to place, collect the tribute, and go home. Hey, we're here for the wine harvest. Hey, we're here for the oil harvest. Hey, we're here for the emmer and the barley harvest. Hey, I hear you got some great wood there. We want our taste. Okay, so that's really the one misconception that really annoys me. The idea that Egypt had an empire. It never had an empire. It was a hegemony. It was a hegemony from which it extracted tribute. It didn't care about control. Didn't want control. It wasn't their thing. Even in like big cities where they would like set up their statues, that was really just a reminder of who's in control, more than trying to make the people think like Egyptians. This was not an annexation. This was basically a squeezing them. It's more mafia. It's more mafia than real government. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's cool that you wear a necklace also. Anyway, have a great night. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. And it looks like our last super chat here is from Kwame Adu007 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, I'm not convinced by Genesis 1:11 being written during the exile either. Cool. I think that's probably sensible. What are some of the Egyptian elements you see in Genesis 1:11? Okay. The idea, for example, of God speaking something and it comes into being. This is something that we find in the Memphite theology. Okay, so that's one of the motifs that's really very Egyptian that we do find here. The whole idea that man is created from the earth. Again, right from this is from the Khnum theology, where the god Khnum, the creator god Khnum, creates creates the first man and woman out of clay on the potter's wheel. Now, not exactly, we don't find the potter's wheel being used in Genesis, but and is made out of the earth. We do find other little things in there as well. So it is we do find Egyptian motifs. We also find Mesopotamian motifs as well. So it's not just one thing, but we do find these sort of things that are sort of woven subtly through the text. I haven't done a full study of this, in all honesty, so I'd probably have to do more work on this to discover more. But they are there. They are there. They are present. And you do find, for example, a lot more, for example, at the end of the book. I mean, at the end of the book of Genesis, you find a lot of them. Okay? A lot of them. The chain of gold as a high reward of office. You find the clothes given to Joseph when he's vizier. I mean, that's special. I mean, that's really unique. The mummification of Jacob. I mean, nobody mummifies except Egyptians in the ancient Near East. So you find a lot of them at the end. You do find, say, for example, the dowry of silver. That Pharaoh gives to Sarah. That's very, very Egyptian. So there are motifs that we do find. It's just woven through this. But says again, you find more after 11. Like, for example, you start seeing at chapter 12 and onwards, and in very, very much detail. But they're also in 1 through 11 as well. I should do a better, more thorough study of it, but you do find them in Genesis 1 for sure. Genesis 2, I think to some extent, although I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh, the serpent. The serpent is also very, very much an Egyptian motif. The Nakash, the serpent, is a modern translation. Some modern translations will now call the serpent the shining one. Well, Nakash is not just a shining. It's a kind of it's bronze, but it's bronze for mirrors. And we find a lot of these mirrors in Egypt. A lot of them. They were an Egyptian good. So we even find it even in like Genesis 3, Nakash. So I mean that is crazy fascinating to see that reference to bronze, but not just any kind of bronze, the kind of bronze that's used for mirrors. So very, very interesting, very Egyptian, and we got a lot of examples from Egypt on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very interesting question. Again, there's more work that can be done here. I wish I had more time to do this work. Again, my day is exceptionally limited because of my working circumstances, but again, love to do work on this because this would be just absolutely fascinating to get into really the weeds on. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, so that's the last of the super chats, and we're at we've gone now for 2 hours and 20 minutes. So that's pretty quick for us getting through all the super chats. Let's take some non-super chats, and then we'll call it a night unless there's some more super chats. Because we don't have to go 3 hours every live stream now, do we? Oh, we just got another super chat. From Angel VWM. The more I study the Bible, and I want to thank him for his $5 super chat. He says, the more I study the Bible, the more it reminds me of a fractal. For example, parables being a picture of something so much greater. Do you notice it? Oh, yes, I notice it. You do see it really in a lot in the Psalms, and that's because it's poetry. And poetry is compressed language. You'll see it in prophetic language too, when a prophecy is being done, or there's a song. Yeah, you find this where poetry is used, and that's some of the reason why it does remind you of a fractal is because of the compressed language. And compressed language is very, very interesting because it's trying to communicate more than just what the words alone communicate. There's a semantic meaning on top of the compressed language, on top of the language that tries to communicate something much, much bigger. So, you do see this somewhat in the parables. You do see this definitely in the poetics. It's definitely there. So anyway, I definitely noticed it. Here's if you really want to see this in spades, if you want to see this in spades, there's a great exercise. Okay, I highly recommend this. Okay, it's actually a kind of Western meditation. Let me give you this. Take a psalm. It doesn't matter which psalm. One that you can easily read in a single sitting. Okay. So take a psalm, read it 3 times a day for an entire month. Okay? You think you see fractals in the parables. At the end of the month, you are going to see things you have never dreamed you noticed. Just, it's crazy how much you notice after you read a passage 3 times a day, every day for a month. The meanings just almost explode. They open up to you in ways you just can't even imagine. It's an incredibly productive exercise. And this is what we would call Western meditation. You're taking a passage, you're going over and over and over and over it again. You read it 3 times a day. You can even read it 5 times a day. And you get to day 20 and you go, oh man, this is so boring. I've read this 100 times, but you really haven't. But you feel like you have. And you're going, oh, this is so tedious. Why am I reading this for the 80th time? Get to day, persevere through to day 28, 29, and 30. And you'll understand why. It just blows your mind what you start seeing. Okay? So there's a orthopraxis tip for you there that will really sort of change the way you start looking at scripture. And you can do it with parables, you can do it with Psalms, you can do this with any text in the Bible. It's well worth doing. Well worth doing. I still do this myself. Especially with a passage where I'm going to have to really engage something. I will read this passage like 100 times, just because it's that effective. I know. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. I see another super chat from Historical Strategy Gaming for $2. Can't you end it early? Hee hee hee. Well, I could, but people keep super chatting me. I wonder who. Historical Strategy Gaming? You just don't want me to quit. I swear, if I kept on for 6 hours, I'd be still at it. People would still be sending me super chats, but I get tired and hungry and thirsty. And my bunny wants fed. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat and for the good sense of humor. Okay. All right. So, a few non-super chats now. Okay. Someone the person asks, which dynasty of Egypt had the highest percentage of slaves among the population? Oh, that's hard to answer. Really. More during the imperial periods. Quote, kingdom periods. They're not really imperial periods, but kingdom periods. We do find a high number of slaves during Dynasty 4. We do find a high number of slaves during Dynasty 12. And a high number of slaves during Dynasty 18. 18 and 19. So, those are basically the high points of slave ownership, of slave populations in Egypt. So 4, 12, and 18, 19. They're still collecting slaves. Honestly, they're still collecting slaves into dynasties 20, 22, even 23 and 25. They're still collecting slaves. So that's that's really where we're going to find most of the highest population densities of slave capturing. So So, thank you very much for the question. I hope that helped. Very much appreciated. Another super chat from Camel Leopard. Oops, this just slipped out. Grimace, just ignore it, winky face. Oh, yeah. Just slipped out, huh? Now you guys are just messing with me. You guys are just messing with me now. How long can we keep them on? You're turning this into a game. Well, thank you for the super chat. I have the cheekiest audience. Definitely. The cheekiest audience. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Let's just see what else here. Non-super chats. Take this one from AWL. How did up-and-coming dynasties legitimize themselves religiously? Two ways they legitimize themselves religiously. First way they legitimize themselves is they try to make a connection to an ancient ancestor. Okay, so in the case of Seti the First, the Ramesside clan did not come from royal stock. They were from the Nile Delta. They weren't from the royal family of Thebes. So they had to do this. They had to legitimize themselves. They did this by tying their ancestry. In the case of Seti the First, he went through the line of kings and just inserted himself in. In the case of Ramses II, he called the great queen of Amenhotep I, whose name is Akhmosu Nefertari. He said that's his mother, even though he has no blood tie to her. Okay, so there is that aspect. Now, on the other hand, the other way they legitimize themselves religiously is they gave temples lots and lots and lots of money. They made huge donations to the temples of metal, precious stones, labor, land grants for offerings. So, in doing so, they would fund the building of temples to expand, say, the temple precincts, and that would also help to legitimize them. For example, the huge hypostyle hall at Karnak, and it's massive, and it's beautiful. It's massive, and but it's basically a part of an endowment that was given by Seti I and Ramses II to help legitimize them to the priests at Karnak. Okay. Now, the other way we find sometimes that they dynasties, illegitimate dynasties, or say non-royal dynasties, would legitimize themselves, was to write ex eventu prophecies about themselves. We find this happen at the beginning of Dynasty 12. Dynasty 12 had a legitimacy problem. Amenemhat I was not a direct descendant of Mentuhotep IV. He was a distant cousin. But he had to legitimize his dynasty because he was just the vizier. He wasn't in line for the throne. But he usurped the throne after Mentuhotep IV sort of lost his marbles and then died. And then Amenemhat I took over. So he had to legitimize himself religiously. And how he did this was he wrote these ex eventu prophecies, such as the prophecy of Neferti. And these are the prophecies where we find, chaos happening in the Nile Delta, the river turning to blood, the sun growing dark, slaves becoming the masters, a slave who couldn't own a small chest now owns a huge, magnificent, beautiful chest. These sorts of images we find in Neferti. The prophecy of Ipuwer is basically taking a lot of that imagery from Neferti and is copying it in an extended prophecy during the end of Dynasty 12. So those prophetic texts that we find in the Middle Kingdom are a means to legitimize the 12th dynasty. So there were several strategies that kings used to legitimize themselves. However, they all did it in combination with uh, giving the temple cults lots and lots of money. Yeah. Donations go a long way. The upper class gets their kids into college. I mean, it still works. Upper class people get their kids, and wealthy people get their kids in college by donating lots of money. They don't have to get good grades. They just have to have lots of money. $1 million endowment for a new building goes a long ways to overlooking bad grades. Ugh. It still happens. Still happens. All right. So, NA, thank you very much for that question. It's an interesting question. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now I see another super chat came in from Angel VWM for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, I find the Bible the most amazing collection of books in the world. Yes, indeed. There's no way it was pulled together by humans alone. Thank you so much for your time and info. Here's some extra points. Ooh, wow. Extra points. Super extra special points with sprinkles on them. I'm getting tired and slap happy, but but I do really appreciate the super chats, and I do really appreciate the support. And I agree with you. There is providence involved with this. I mean, this is the inspiration of Scripture. This is what goes into the inspired Word of God. Now, the inspired Word of God is very misunderstood, and I wish our churches taught this better, because it's really super fascinating. Inspiration does not begin by the prophet sitting down, the holy writer sitting down, and just being possessed by God and going, and then going. He doesn't go into a trance and wake up and go, wow, what did I just write? Oh, it's so good. How could I have written such a thing? That's not the doctrine of the inspiration of Scripture. That's the Urantia book. Okay, that's UFO cults. That's automatic writing. What the inspiration of Scripture is that God prepared the writer throughout his entire life to sit down and write the words. Okay? It begins with many generations before the writer ever is born. What's the clan? What's the history of the clan? Where did they grow up? What's the life experiences of the writer? What jobs did he perform? What experiences did he have? What kind of schooling? What literature did he read? All of this stuff goes into preparing the writer. It's a whole lifetime. Inspiration is the experience of many lifetimes being funneled into one person to prepare him for the writing of the words. And this is why the Bible is so amazing. This is why it's so amazing. Because God has prepared these people in such a meaningful way that when they write those words, God is directing the pen through life circumstances. Directing the pen through life circumstances. Yes, the writer is using his choice of words, but God made it so that those were the words he would choose. So it's a very complicated doctrine. It's a very, very complicated doctrine, but I think it's a doctrine also that requires better teaching as well. Because the problem is when you start having this, as I said, the automatic writing kind of inspiration, things get very strange very quickly. Now, there were people who were, filled with the Spirit at some point that sort of lost control. In a way, you do see some prophets, acting like this in the Old Testament. but by no means all prophets. The prophet Isaiah is reacting in a much more circumspect way than, say, the old prophet who prophesied to the unknown prophet who gets killed by a lion. This happens where there was a prophet in, I think it's the Book of Kings, where he's told to prophesy against the king of Israel, but don't eat anything in Israel. Go to Israel, come back. Don't eat anything along the way. And he gets fooled by the old prophet, and the old prophet says, hey, I'm a prophet. God told me that you can come to my house and have some food. Yeah. And then mid-meal, the old prophet gets possessed by the Lord and goes, says the Lord, you're going to die by a lion on the way back, and your donkey's going to be okay. Okay. And that's what happens. He's taken over by the Spirit of the Lord to prophesy. But we don't see this happening to all the prophets, and not always in that way. Isaiah is he's writing through an amanuensis. He's dictating. He's not going into a prophetic trance. So not every prophet and not every writer of scripture is going to go through that same method. Each of them are going to go through different means. Moses, writes very straightforward, very simply. It's a didactic style. A prophet like Ezekiel going to go write it in prophetic. Excuse me. So anyway, this is complicated. So, as I say, some will be possessed by a spirit, some won't. It just depends. It just depends on the individual prophet involved and the individual writer. For example, in the case of the Book of Kings, I don't think there was any sort of possession involved here, or infilling. Okay, just because it's in many senses, the Book of Kings is a compilation of other books that were written. And we know that, say, Kings and Chronicles are compilations of other sources because it cites the sources. At the end of every like episode of the Kings, it says, are not the deeds of Ahab written in the book of the Kings? The deeds of the Book of the King, and you see that, and you go, okay, yeah, it's even citing its source here. It's even citing its source. So there isn't that need for, say, a prophetic trance to occur. There just isn't the need there. That can actually be done just by good record keeping. But somebody had to prepare the record keeper to be accurate in their trade. Yeah, he probably went to a school of the scribes. He probably grew up in a family of scribes. Somebody had to teach him to write and read. And the Lord would use him in that particular way. So it is an amazing collection of books. But God is orchestrating history. He is orchestrating history so that it comes out this way. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for the extra points. Very, very much appreciate it. And it is a great comment. It's a great comment. Okay. Historical strategy gaming. We should do a 16-hour marathon. No, we shouldn't. Okay. I believe this is Gospel to the Greek Church. Thank you very much for the super chat for $10. Any opinions on the depiction of ancient Egypt in fiction? The Mummy, Gods of Egypt, Yu-Gi-Oh, Stargate, Prince of Egypt, etc. And which is your favorite? God bless. Um, hmm. Well, the most accurate one is actually Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. That is by far the most accurate depiction of Egypt that I have seen in a movie, bar none. Okay, The Mummy, great fantasy, terrible Egyptology. The Egyptology in The Mummy is awful. It's awful. But I did love the hieroglyphs of the TIE fighter and R2D2. Uh, it's right behind the mummy when he presses him up against the wall, or right behind one of the characters as he's being pressed up against the wall. Gods of Egypt, pretty bad. I'd say that was pretty bad, especially the costuming. Costuming in Gods of Egypt was terrible. Mm. Mm. Awful. Awful. And I haven't seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Stargate, not good Egyptology again. Beautiful costumes, though. Beautiful, beautiful costumes. Prince of Egypt, they kind of tried, but it was messed up in a lot of ways. So again, Cecil D. DeMille's Ten Commandments has some of the best recreation. If you cut out the love story out of that film, that would have been a great film. I know some people still think it's a good film. It gets really long in some places, though, by a useless love story in the middle of Midian. You didn't need that in there. If he had sort of done some creative editing and sort of cut that out, it would have been a lot better. A lot better. So, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. And that's sort of my opinion of those popular media. I like some of them, even if they're, say, more inspired by Egypt than accurate. I still love The Mummy. I still love Stargate. Even if they're not accurate. They're entertaining. And I can let something slide for that. But I wouldn't say that they're great depictions of Egypt. And I wouldn't say the same of most of these anyway. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Saint Roman. Nihanto or Uchikatana? Personally, it's the Uchi for me. Like to end the conflict with one stroke. Good evening, Dr. Falk. I have to go with Katana. I have to go with the Nihanto. And it doesn't matter if it's Katana or Tachi. Okay. Big fan of Nihanto. Big fan of Nihanto. We used to go to the Chicago Sword Show when I was a grad student at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And that sword show just happened always at exam time, which was always inconvenient. Do I study for final exams for graduate school, or do I go to the sword show? Go to the sword show, of course. There's no thinking about this. Are you crazy? But yes, I actually prefer Nihanto. I can understand the Uchikatana. I can understand the but it is still kind of a woman's weapon, honestly. Yes, it is. It is deadly. It is deadly. It is quick, but it is also it's also it's more of a defensive weapon too. It's meant to be a defensive weapon, and I just love the beauty of the katana. I just absolutely love the beauty of a good katana, and it doesn't actually matter to me the age of the katana. I'm big connoisseur of a variety of styles of katana too. So of Nihanto as well. So for me, a good Skendaito smith is just as intriguing and interesting as something from, say, the Edo period. You got the Shinto stuff, you got the new Shinto stuff, then you got the Koto blades, and Koto blades are okay. I'm not terribly huge fan of the Koto stuff. I find that the Koto stuff the Haman line tends to be a lot more simplistic. The sword guards, the Suba are a lot less. They're much more utilitarian. They're thin. They're utilitarian. They're less decorated. I like the metalwork on the sword guards. Beautiful, beautiful pieces of artwork. Just fabulous. So I don't get that with the Uchi I don't get the sense with the Uchigatana of a great work of art. The Nihanto, a good quality Nihanto, is just plain beautiful. Just plain beautiful. And for me, it's as much about aesthetics as it is about utility. Just as much about aesthetics. So for me, I'm going to go with the Nihanto every time. Just because I love the aesthetics. Love the aesthetics. So anyway, thank you for the question. It's an interesting question. It's not one I'm often asked. But definitely you've got my opinion here. Okay, let's see what other questions we take. Daniel Lowry, will we ever see you pick up that Pelham Blue SG and shred? No, you won't. Not a chance. Nope. Will not. You'll never see me pick up that guitar and shred. Sorry. Frankly, I need a better amp anyway. I don't have a good amp, so yeah, you're never gonna see me shred it. And I live in an apartment, which doesn't help. And the people in this apartment are very noise sensitive, so yeah, it ain't gonna happen. So you're not gonna see it. But thank you for the question. Yeah, I generally play with headphones on, so for me, it's I have to keep things really really quiet. So I have to be very very careful. So um. Hmm. Okay, Cole Walker asks, "What would one need to get started in bladesmithing?" Depends. Depends if you want to do a stock removal or hand forged. Okay. So, and there's really several ways you can do this. A lot of people start by buying pre-made blades and putting handles on it. That's technically knife making, and you can then do all sorts of crazy art. I mean, for some knife makers, as opposed to bladesmithing. A lot of people just start with pre-made knives and then put handles on them, handguards on them, and just decorate them. Okay. If you're going to do bladesmithing, then you're actually making the knife itself. And there's a lot of ways you can get started with knife smithing. You can do stock removal, which is basically you're filing or grinding away. You start with a rough shape, and then you just grind away till you get a blade. If you want to take the next step up, you can build a small forge. And you can do that out of refractory bricks. And refractory bricks come in two types, hard type and soft type. And you basically get a soft brick and you hollow it out to kind of create a chamber, small chamber. And it doesn't have to be very big. It only has to be have a diameter hole in about that big. between two, say, soft bricks, and you make a hole in one side, and you put a, say, a propane torch, shoot a propane torch in there, and you can get it pretty hot enough that you can actually do forging. You would need an anvil, of course, and probably the big expense of, say, forging is the anvil. Anvils are expensive, and they're heavy, and they're very, very difficult to move if you ever have to do that. I didn't have that big of an anvil. My anvil was only 80 pounds, but still it was big enough. A lot of professional bladesmiths will have like a 300 to 500 pound anvil that they have to get some guy with a crane on the back of a truck to move. But I've never gotten into it that deep. I did a lot of stock removal, and I did forging of small blades. So I didn't need a super large anvil. Actually, in the end, too, I use that anvil more for doing jewelry, like hand-forged jewelry. So that's what I ended up using it. I found that hand-forged jewelry was just looks spectacular. So it was just something that, but yeah, that's what you need to get started, is you need the metal, you need some way to remove or shape the metal, and then some way to harden the metal. So with that, you can either use a forge, and oil or water quenching, depending on the type of steel. Sometimes air quenching will work. Or you can also take it to a spring. If you make the blanks, you can take it to, say, a place that does springs. And some springs will actually allow people to harden metal as a service. And that's what I did with my first blades. My first blades, I did stock removal of 01 tool steel, took it to a spring maker, and paid them like something like $50-100 to harden them to a certain temperature. And then I used a copper blocked differential to harden the spine so it was less brittle. So anyway, that's how you could get started in bladesmithing. You know, your selection of handle materials will depend on what sort of what you want to do. You can do it out of wood, leather, metal, various kinds of metal can be used for handle materials. Ivory, even stone is been done. Ceramics, there's been some people who've done basically fine porcelain knife handles. It's exceptionally beautiful. Very hard to do the fit, though. Very hard to do the fit. You got to almost have a screw pommel to get the fit just right. But anyway, I'm now blathering on about knife making. Thank you for the question. So let's take some more non-super chats here and get me off the subject of knife making, because I'm waxing eloquent here and going to put people to sleep. Yeah, we're going to wrap this up very soon. So we'll take one or two more non-super chats, and we're going to call it a night here, because we have been going for 3 hours now. Carrie Coogan, here's a good question. How much did the Egyptians and other ancient Near Eastern cultures know about marine life? I assume they never saw Blue Planet. Tongue out of mouth. Are Tiamat, Leviathan imagined because the ocean is so unknown? Okay. In some ways, some cultures knew about this marine life more than others. Egyptians actually knew about marine life. They actually had quite a bit of familiarity with it. Even though they were a river culture, they also did some expeditions into the Red Sea. Now, when I say Red Sea here, I mean the Gulf of Aqaba. They're building boats. They're going down on trade expeditions to Punt, and they're taking a sea route to get there. Okay? And the we have, for example, on the reliefs at the Temple of Dir el-Bahri, the boats that Queen Hatshepsut commissions to go down to Punt, but underneath the boats are a variety of sea life that was found in the ocean. And you have in there stingrays and sharks and a variety of strange fish. So they did have some considerable knowledge of, I mean, I don't know if they went out fishing there. We do know that there was a Old Kingdom port at El Yarf. So we do know that the Egyptians' experience with the Red Sea goes way back to the at least the Old Kingdom, at least to the building of the Pyramid of Khufu. So fourth dynasty, early fourth dynasty at that. So there's a whole lot there that that they did know. So we don't see it commonly in those reliefs, in a lot of reliefs, but we do see it in reliefs, and they were aware of it, and they do seem to have some knowledge of Red Sea fisheries. So anyway, again, I don't know if they were big anglers or big fishermen, but they did seem to catch fish out there from time to time, enough to draw it. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Okay. I'll take one more question, and then I'm going to call it a night, because we've passed the 3-hour mark. So I'll take one more non-super chat, and then that will be it. And if I don't find one that catches my fancy, then we'll just call it a night. Okay, I'll take this one from the Bible Exegete. And this will be the last non-super chat question of the night. Do you think that the chronology of the Jewish and Israelite kings is set, or it still needs some adjustments? Many act like Thiele nailed it perfectly. Okay. We have to understand that Thiele's work went through 3 revisions. 3 revisions. And he's getting it better with each revision. Okay? Now, with his first revision of his book, he got 80% of it. Okay? He got 80% of it. He got, with the second revision, he got to 95%. Third revision, about 97. Kenneth Kitchen added another couple percent to that. So it might require a minor tweak here and there, but it is pretty darn accurate at this point. So if you even go according to Thiele's second edition, you know, you've got a pretty good, accurate basis for the kings of Israel as compared to the kings of Judah. I do not think it needs an overhaul. I don't think it needs an overhaul, not in the slightest. It's pretty close. He did pretty much nail it. There is still some question. I think it's the king of Uzzah still needs some better explanation. But I think that's about the only piece of the puzzle that's really sort of in any real doubt at this point. Most of those reigns are within 1 or 2 years, so there might be a year here or a year there that could be tweaked, but really not much. Really not much. It's very accurate. It was excellent work. Really, really outstanding work. And it just got better. It got better with each revision. So I think his work is excellent. It's methodologically sound. It's operating with good presuppositions, good assumptions, well justified assumptions. Okay, so these are not assumptions out of whole cloth, but they've got a good foundation and basis to go on. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. That is going to be our final question of the night. And I want to thank everyone who came out tonight. We did go over some very, very strange territory tonight. It was was an interesting night. It was a very, very interesting live stream tonight. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank our super chatters who really, really help us make ends meet. We really, really appreciate all the super chats and all the donations. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters who don't get nearly enough thanks. They help us buy new equipment and keep our equipment well maintained. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who watch this and who and who really by watching and commenting and liking or even disliking help promote our channel to the algorithm. Okay, we have one more super chat that I've got to thank here. Just came in the last moment. I'm gonna hide it. Come up yet? It has not come up yet on. Yep, I'm gonna have to start and restart this, and that'll be fine. I do want to share it. Connect. Loading. There we go. JC gives us a 1999 super chat. Thank you very much for some Waffle House in the morning. Ooh, waffles or pancakes? The next great food debate. Good night, Dr. Falk. Well, good night to you too. We'll have that. We'll have the waffles versus pancake debate next time on the next live stream. So look forward to that on live stream 66. By the way, I like waffles. Excellent choice. Anyway, good night, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.